about myself. I've actually only recently been with the company. Ian Charkos, who's the chairman and has really been responsible for driving the company's position, approached me a while back and said, look, I need an outside person. He had a very qualified team in Austria, but they've all worked primarily in that part of the world. He said, I just need someone to give me a second opinion. Can you do some work for me? So I looked first off of, at the onshore field, which we'll talk a little bit about, and then I went over there. And I met a very professional team over there, do very thorough work, and I had a look at all the prospects. By that stage, the Welchow well, which we'll talk a bit more about later, hadn't yet spudded. I went to site, I looked at everything else they had, and I came back to Ian and I said, well, you know, where do I sign? So I'm a director now of the company, and I'm subbing for Ian today. One of the main reasons I decided to join the company is through my long and varied career, I've worked for tiny companies, big companies, you name it. But one of the success factors in the oil and gas business is to get the opportunity to be the first company to follow giant companies into an area, because they always leave something behind. And personally, I've been involved in at least, as a team member or a leader, of at least 5 commercial oil and gas discoveries on the Northwest Shelf that were left behind by Wapit, who thought no one would find anything else in the ground they left. And here we are in Austria, and guess what? ADX is only the 3rd ever operating company in Austria. Austria's got a long history in the oil business. They've produced over 1 billion barrels of oil. And there was ExxonMobil's Shell who formed RAG. Don't ask me how to pronounce the 3 words that go into that one. And then there's OMV, which were formed as a competitor. Both those companies grew to a huge size. OMV left Austria, and as you know, have been pretty successful elsewhere. RAG stayed, and if you go on their website, pretty much all they talk about is CCS. In the depleted fields, pumping CCS down. So they're no longer truly an E&P company. Enter ADX. It's just the perfect place to be. And despite what we might think over here, actually Austrian conditions are pretty good. They're pretty supportive of oil and gas. They have to import 90% of their gas. Their gas costs them around about $20 an MCF. That's nearly double what it is here in the eastern states. You can find a field there, next slide please. You can find a field there that might only be 50 BCF, is worth the same as a 400 BCF field in the North Sea. Well, once I saw that, I said, you know, count me in, you know. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but why they get there is because there's infrastructure everywhere. There's pipelines, it doesn't cost a lot to drill, there's demand, there's reasonable regulatory conditions. They want you to do it well and properly, that's fine. In fact, ADX has other sort of renewable projects that it will get around to. Well, you can do them there because you're right near all those facilities. Much harder to do them here in Australia, I can tell you. So there's some stats there for you. It's around about 8 times the value to have a BCF of gas, say at Welchow, in Austria, as it is to have one in the offshore North Sea. Next slide. Now, when I went across, Welchow hadn't yet been spudded, the rig hadn't got there, and so I was really looking at the Anshoff area where we've got oil exploration. There's that number 2 there, where we've got oil production, or will have oil production, and the other acreage that the company has. And I thought, well, for sure we're going to find more here. And that's when I went back to Ian on the basis of that, said, oh, you know, I'm committed. Subsequent to that, good timing by me, I guess, Welchow appears to have come in. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the meantime. But it is not the only thing the company has. If it comes in at the size that the pre-well estimates indicate, then it's going to be the biggest discovery in Austria for I don't know how long. Huge. Next slide, please. Here's a shot of Welchow, and shows you a little bit why it's kind of a difficult area, because what you're looking at is there's the Alps, and there's the foothills, and then there's the basins, and there's this thrusted terrain. And so you have an underlying geology, it runs one way, and a thrusted terrain comes over the top. It's quite difficult to map, even with 3D seismic. Now, we don't have 3D where Welchow is, because it's almost mountainous. They don't think it's mountainous, but here in Australia we'd call them mountains. And I went there and drove up a nice road, beautiful site. It was the second biggest individual well site I've ever seen anywhere. And beautiful gravel here and there. The whole place, all of Austria, by the way, looks like a big garden. At least I thought so. And they're very, very organised. So on there you can see a seismic section. You can see all those thrust panels. Now what's happened is, and I'll just go back a little bit here. So in my career, early on, I think the companies thought I needed a bit of a lesson, and they sent me to the rigs. It was like FIFO on rigs, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. You know, it's when I didn't realise it at the time, but I subsequently did. When you're out there, that's where you're capturing the real data. Oil and gas business is quite different from mining. Our next data point, our next real data point might be 50 kilometres away, or 60 or 100. So what goes in between is a model, someone's interpretation. And you need to be able to, and someone's always been into an area before you go there. So you need to be able to pick that apart and say, what's data and what's their interpretation? I like to think that's been the heart of my career and why I've been able to find or lead teams to find oil and gas in so many different basins. Because I've never taken what the previous past operators said as being right, tested it. Now here in Austria, we've got pretty much the same thing. Long-time operators, been there for 75 years. No competition. Moving on to other things. Difficult environment. Think and are, take OMV, finding big reserves of hydrocarbons elsewhere, easier. Meantime, prices in Europe of the commodity goes through the roof. Suddenly, you can find 50 Bcf. And for a company of the market cap size of ADX, that's going to be a multiple on our net worth if we make a discovery of just that size. That's a modest size. There's easily prospects of that scale within the company's portfolio. So they're drilling well chow. OMV have pretty much facilitated us getting the rig. They're happy to see it drilled. They want to see it tested. They've been very friendly about it. And we only have a rig for a little while longer, and we've got to the stage now where we've got some facts. I'm just going to point here, these colours here, but basically close to prognosis, within a few percent of the prognosis that our excellent team put together. We saw the seal, and then we saw the reservoir. The shows, that's the gas shows, got higher, then got wetter. When we say wetter, we don't mean water, we mean liquid hydrocarbons. So the shows increased, they went very high in scale when we hit fractures, and they stayed there right through the whole projected section, and we went out of the reservoir into the predicted non-reservoir section and still saw the shows. So we don't really know what we've got. Carbonate reservoirs are a bit hard to evaluate first up. You need to run wireline logs and test them and so on. That's where we are right now. And there'll probably be another announcement on the progress of this well early next week. But let's just go back to data and interpretation. The data is the well came in close to prognosis. When they went into the reservoir section, the shows increased. Those shows were wet. When they pulled the core out, it was full of fractures, and it smelt of hydrocarbons, and in some places, condensate bubbled out of it. Now, that doesn't prove anything yet, but those are the facts we have. So now we're on the logs. That'll involve an MDT. The MDT is quite a difficult tool to run. You've got to sort of expunge all the heavy mud out of the hole, send this thing down, seal off where it's going to draw from, and you capture a sample, but you also get pressures. So that's what we need now. We need pressure data. And from that, we'll be able to extrapolate what this well has found. So it's still kind of early days, but it's all good news to this point. And the amount of potential column is consistent with the pre-drill predictions, where the mean calculation of the resource was 800 Bcf. I can't tell you what that would be worth in Austria. A lot, believe me, a lot. Now, we're not there yet. and it has to go through this critical testing phase. So there remains risk until we see the outcome from that. This is a project that I was sort of sent across to get a bit of an idea on. The company had made an oil discovery. It's currently producing about 200 barrels a day, which generates about 12 million Aussie a year. I think it's about 7 million net, just on a few hundred barrels a day. That's a project further to the northeast in the country. This one is new. It's called Anshoff. And what I realised when I looked at all the maps and data, every single structure in this area that's been properly mapped is full to the spill point of oil. So you just got to map the structures right and get a reservoir in there and you're going to have oil. Now what we know, shown by these yellow blobs, is we can see actually where the reservoir is improving. It definitely is improving in that direction. That's probably where we're going to drill next. The challenge in this area is converting your maps to depth, because you're using seismic. There's 3D seismic here, so you're mapping it in time, you've got to convert it to depth. We didn't quite get it right with the second well. We want to get it right with the third well. So we're taking our time about. We're not rushing, taking our time about. But if you get the maps right, if you get the structures right, you're going to find oil. We've already pre-purchased a facility that will take us to a capacity of, I think it's 3,000 barrels a day. So there's a fair bit of confidence to pre-invest in that, but we've got to go about it the right way. Now, in my career, once again, just talking to why I've got involved with the company and or they wanted me to get involved with the company, I don't like drilling anything but your best prospect. I don't like drilling something until I've dealt with all the risks that you can with the data you've got. I don't like drilling the biggest prospect if it's not the best prospect. So we're not going to do that. We might need a bit more time with this to get our next well right, or the next few wells right. But there's a lot of oil in this area, and I think between all the prospects ancillary to Anshoff, just in the area, either already leased by ADX or adjacent to that, which we can lease because of the friendly Austrian authorities, there's around about 9 million barrels estimated. Tell you what, that'd be worth a lot of money and could take the company into a real healthy production state while we also drill all the gas prospects in the country. I haven't put up anything about the corporate position of the company. It's in the handout that you've got there, but I can say that our farminees are fantastic companies as well, MND and MCF. They're funding most of the activities we're doing at the moment, and people are exercising their options. I don't know how much has come in so far, but if everyone exercises their options, it brings $9 million into the company. So it's pretty handy. I think the well at Welshow, total cost is about 5.1 million euros. It's about 8 million Aussie, of which over 50% is being paid by our farming partner. So in summary, here's a company. Look, last year I think it was, I presented a keynote address at a Good Oil conference. And it's full of little Aussie companies, little listed companies, who frankly, to my mind, just lost their mojo. They didn't know what to do. They had projects in Australia and they were being regulated out of business. Please don't get me started on that subject. I went to Austria. Now here is a jurisdiction I didn't know anything about. And that's why I had to go there. I went there, I found a government that's putting in place strict environmental and other regulations that you need to follow, and if you follow them, guess what? You get rewarded. Straight into the pipeline, straight into the refinery. If you can do it, you'll be heroes there. It's a very different feel to the them and us situation we've got over here. I'll tell you what, it's hard. It's hard being in the oil and gas industry unless you're in one of the areas that the government of the day happens to favour here in Australia. It's crazy stuff. But there, they know they need it. They want you to do it the right way, fair enough. Do it as cleanly as you can. And if you can't, you can sell every drop that you find without going very far at all because the infrastructure's there and waiting. Not many little Aussie companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange are in that position. You can do your own research. So I said to him, count me in. And here I am. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Does anyone have any questions for John?
Yeah, I've got one.
Okay.
Thanks for that. You think mining regulation in Australia is hard, you should try in Victoria. It is much worse. More importantly, for your share price and market capitalisation, the key thing here in Melbourne will be where did you play your country footy and who's your AFL team?
Well, I grew up in Murchison, a little country town on a dairy farm up near Shepparton, and I was a rookie draft down to Melbourne during the VFL days. And then I started school young because there wasn't any kids around, so they started me at 4.5. So by the time I finished my uni degree in Melbourne, I don't know, I was still only 19. They thought I was a bit of an idiot. So they sent me over to the west to learn my craft. I ended up playing with South Fremantle, with Maurice Rioli and Stephen Michael and great players like that. And in the second last game of the 1982 season, for those of you that going back an era or two, I got a broken jaw. And I was working for a big American company called Occidental Petroleum at the time, and I said, John, look, you know, we've had to bring a bloke from Brisbane to replace you and a bloke from California to replace him. What are you? Are you a footballer or a geologist? And that's pretty much what happened. Then they sent me on the rigs, and I thought it was punishment, but I've subsequently realised it was the best thing that happened to me. True story. Thank you.
It's funny how the universe works. Hang on, John Forward's got a question. Wait.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to ask you, I think you've taken a core from the
Yes,
hole.
yeah.
Can you tell us anything about what you saw, what you found?
Yeah,
in
there
that
was
core?
a lot of fracturing in the core. Of course, you know, when you take core, it's generally in a core barrel, and in a core barrel you can't necessarily, particularly when it's fractured, you can't sort of cut that barrel open. That site has to go to the lab. But I think there's a photo on the website that just shows how smashed up it is. And there was a hydrocarbon odour, and my understanding is condensate seen sort of bubbling from the core. Now, I did a lot of time on well sites, as I explained, and you know, one of the jobs of the well site geologist is that you bring the cores to the surface and so on. So I've seen a lot of cores, and I can tell you, you generally don't get a strong hydrocarbon odour and some evidence, physical evidence of the hydrocarbon presence without it being saturated. And we were drilling that well with 11.5 pound mud. That's not super heavy, but it's pretty heavy. And so the fractured zones in particular would be flushed by the mud. That's why they've got to now run an MDT, where they sort of evacuate the mud out. It has these pads that seal against the side of the hole, and they open it up. Hopefully they can cycle through what comes in and then get a clean test of what's in the formation. So that's what's happening over the next few days. And so I think, you know, let's see what happens on Monday. But it's a relatively difficult reservoir. It's a carbonate reservoir which has low primary porosity, and the porosity and the permeability is connected by the fractures. I'm familiar with this elsewhere, but not there. So I'm going on what everybody are telling me. But I do know that our team in Vienna, who I met and regard highly, and the experts they brought in, are all very confident. That's all I can say.
Sounds good.